that's how political change actually works. It's not like we all get on board with one thing and then it happens, right? We have complicated movements where different people have different ideas about how far to go or what the end goal is, and maybe and we can achieve certain things, and then we can argue about what else to achieve, and it's all very messy. But meanwhile, you can't. Meanwhile, we could have we don't have some people on the phone for 3 days to get their cars back, and and other people living in mansions, or owning information companies with a ridiculous amount of power over whatever else everybody else could see and watch and read.
Yeah, I fight for a future where nobody's car is going to get disappeared. You know what I mean? I fight for a future where nobody's going to get disappeared. I fight for, I like to clarify like rants with statements like that, because I think that it dismantles some of the, the deeply instilled concerns established by that Cold War propaganda media machine that currently is taking over YouTube.
Right.
Yeah. And speaking of alternatives to capitalism, that's kind of where Destiny gets stuck with everybody, right? And so I thought I'd start eating a pizza while talking to a professor while talking about Destiny, so I could meme on Destiny, because he was eating pizza while talking to Michael Albert recently, and everyone thought that was hilarious. So, but now that I'm explaining it, it ruins the joke. Okay. All right, welcome everybody. This is the man, the myth, the legend, and the person who gets a good afternoon nap, apparently. Welcome, Professor Ben Burgis.
Hi.
Hi. We can hear you just fine, I think. Everybody in the chat, is everything okay? Can you hear us all? Everyday Progressive Show said, yeet! It's Ben!
Yeah, so earlier when you when I was like, hey, I crashed this afternoon, I'm just waking up, got a few things to do, might be a few minutes, and I was like half awake maybe, and you said take your time. I was like, oh, thank God, okay.
Oh no. That's not what I meant. Yeah, no, you're cool. Everyone's been talking shit. They're all like, oh, he's taking a big fat dump right now, and like all this stuff. So, glad you managed to survive. We were imagining all sorts of alternative scenarios. I thought for sure that this was dog related, but
No, Dog's good.
Cool, cool, cool. Well, let's do some introductions for those who've never joined before. Yeah? All right, well,
Yeah.
I'm theorypleeb, Dave, they, them. I'm from YouTube, y'all. Except that I got deplatformed recently for basically pasting very well-crafted copy pastas into mainstream media videos that were slandering Bernie Sanders. That's really what this basically boils down to. There's a little bit more to it than that. For instance, I did this one, which I will read out loud. I want to give everybody a good idea of what I'm talking about here. So let's get it up on the screen. Here we go. One of the copy pastas that got Theory terminated, they were pasting into CNN's comment sections. For over 17 years, my labor has built your houses, put food on your shelves and your tables, and now I teach. Never once have I been insured or secure. How many of us will have to die? End wage labor coercion. Free housing for all, Medicare for all, reclaim the future, Green New Deal, blah, 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 blah. Same old shit. And that's basically my Bernie story, which, you know, everyone's supposed to craft their own. And I had another one that was like, hey, get the other side of the story, go subscribe to. And then I gave a whole list of kind of left tube, starting with kind of liberal sock dems, going down into some more extreme stuff. So extreme meaning, I mean, really, like when I say extreme, like, you know, like what's the most extreme thing that was on there? Probably, I mean, actually, no, none of it was really extreme. That's the thing. Some people were like, well, you could have toned it down in the copy pastas a little bit. Because like one of them, I was like, if you repeat mainstream media talking points against Bernie, we will never forget that you did this. This is the most important time in history. We don't need this right now. Right? And it's like, okay, I mean, okay, whatever. Anyway, so then I got terminated the same day that I was doing that. And it's not like they just shut off my access to my YouTube stuff. Like I have hundreds of hours of work I put into building that community of over 3,000 subscribers, right, in the last year. And it's not that I got cut off from being able to post. It's I don't have access to any of the interviews that I did. I don't have access to anything I didn't have backed up manually. Some of the things are like really good interviews that are missing. And the worst part of it all is that probably about 100 people out of those 3,000 subs regularly engaged in that community. And so all of my video essays that were getting, in my opinion, better all the time, were really getting better because I was gaining a sense of who my audience was and how like, where are we at, right? Because early in my work, I didn't really know, you know, are they going to be graduate students who are looking into some theory stuff or nope, just people who are already kind of interested in philosophy, but not really knowing where to begin. And so that's the kind of stuff that I was doing. And so I've been on Twitch now streaming for the last 3 weeks. And in that last 3 weeks, I've clocked about 150 hours on Twitch. So I'm basically, you know, I'm basically a real Twitch streamer at this point. I just don't have the nice headphones yet.
All right. Well, how long has it been since they cut you off?
It was on October 19th. It was on October 19th, and I know that because that was the day that Bernie Sanders was getting that endorsement after the heart attack from Nina Turner and AOC. Yeah. I was all hyped up about it. So.
Got it. Yeah. No, that's and did they say anything when they did it that made it clear, like, is that or like is it for a certain amount of time, or are you just gone?
Just done. Just done. Okay. Done. But there was no, that's the thing, is that, you know, we've been talking about automated evictions from services that we have to rent, that we become reliant upon without any warning, recourse, or due process. And a lot of the times the appeals get automatically rejected as well. And then they say, oh, you can't appeal it again. But it's like, but I don't feel like a human even reviewed this.
Yeah, no, I had a little taste of that with the Zero Books YouTube channel several months ago. So we'd done a video about Ben Shapiro. It was called it was just like some random person on Twitter had like requested it. You know, it's like, hey, you want to respond to this video by Ben Shapiro? And it's so because of the stuff he's talking about in the video that we're responding to, it's called it was originally called Ben Shapiro is Wrong About Israel, Anti-Semitism, and American Jews. Those being the subjects he covered.
You used the word Jew. Uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Rookie mistake. So it was flagged as hate speech, and it was put under restriction for like months. We had Doug filed an appeal, and supposedly the appeal was reviewed like the next day or something. Although I can't imagine that any human being could have actually watched that video and come to the conclusion that it was hate speech, because it was all just like the most polite, nerdy, response to Shapiro that you can imagine. It's like, well, actually, that doesn't really follow what he's saying there, and then that was it for months, and then randomly they after it had already been under restriction for months, so you had to click through this screen that said I understand this may be hate speech. Then they just outright deleted it, and then they gave us an appeal about that, and then months later, one sunny day, they were randomly like, oh, we reviewed your appeal, you're good, we put it back without restriction.
Yeah, it feels like there's nobody behind the curtain. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just so arbitrary. It's like they're smiling on you or they're not, and there's just no way to check. There's no way to know who's making this decision, how they're making it. It's just totally absurd. And I've got to say, I think we're really, seeing the limits of liberalism play out in real time on this, because all that liberal, liberal regulators and even well-intentioned social democrats for the most part can kind of come up with to say about this is, okay, we obviously have this problem that there are 3 companies that have this bizarre amount of control over the flow of information. And so all they could think to say is, well, let's break them up. But what does that even mean? You can do that to a certain extent. You can have Facebook and Facebook Messenger not be owned by the same company, but that doesn't really touch the heart of the mass. That still gives Mark Zuckerberg a totally ridiculous amount of control over the flow of information. You really either got to be willing to take the next step and say, no, we actually need to do something extreme, nationalize these companies so we can have some sort of meaningful public oversight and rules about how they work and, impose free speech and all that. Or just accept that it's going to be the whims of 5 CEOs who decide what we get to see and when we get to see it.
Yeah. And something that's been really concerning me about it all, I guess, a lot recently with all of this, is that, there's, I guess the quickest take someone might take is if they look at any of my content, seeing as it's anti-capitalist, or at least, I guess, probably better than anti-capitalist is just constantly critical of capitalism. And my main goal is not to say, oh, I have the alternative figured out. It's just, I think the burden of proof is on everybody right now who doesn't think that alternatives are needed to start talking about this, right? And that we need to have alternatives on the table, right? Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah, and as a result, that is exactly what's being stifled here. But what people will say is oh, well, no wonder they didn't want to have you on the platform with you doing what you're doing, it being something that calls. And the thing is I don't think that's really, maybe one person who was working there could have been the person who saw the appeal and was like, fuck that SJW, but that's very unlikely. What's a lot more likely is that the people who are sitting around tables making decisions at the end of the day when it comes to politics, they just don't see the difference between alternative left and alternative right media, and because they're just so themselves plugged into whatever else, like MSNBC and CNN and the Washington Post taking up the first 5 pages of YouTube, they don't really see an issue with that. They're like, yeah, this will de-radicalize people. That's good. And it's okay, in a certain extent, but what's that going to do to Bernie?
Right.
That's my question. What's that going to do? It doesn't hurt Warren. It doesn't hurt Biden. It doesn't hurt Pete. it hurts Bernie. So it's an implicit bias thing for people who don't care about alternatives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Or the same thing for for Twitter not taking political ads. That's gonna hurt anti-establishment candidates because they're the ones who actually most heavily rely on that to get the word out. But no, I mean, like it's a really it's pretty grim, right? The people, so many of them are willing to make that choice that to say that the alternative, that the way that they're so concerned that grandma is looking at fake news from the right wing, that because the range of restrictions that they can imagine are so narrow that it's like, well, okay, we don't want that, so we'll just empower Facebook, Google, Amazon, whoever, to have these, just to make decisions about what's true and what's not true, what perspectives you can see and which ones you can't see, and that, I mean, it seems redundant to say that that's short-sighted, but it's incredibly short-sighted. Because I mean, it's, if people are, sure, you're still going to get a range of views, for example, about the election, from those candidates who are well within, conventional politics. But, but if you want the possibility of other candidates and other perspectives breaking in, then you've got to keep that door open, to let it in. But I mean, I think a lot of liberals are just sort of content to say, well, all right, since the only, the threat that they're concerned with right now is Trump and the alt-right maybe. And so in order to fend that off, they're willing to just completely hand over the keys to the corporate gatekeepers and whatever. I'm sure we could yell at each other for the next hour about why that's stupid, but it is really stupid.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is the worst part about it all is we're a generation, we meaning a lot of the people who have kind of come into political consciousness online, especially that was kind of post Chomsky. Right? It was post-manufacturing consent being a serious issue because we came into the golden era of alternative media as far as it's been in the last 50 years, because it was like this bursting of 100 blossoms, outside of the 5 or 6 companies that own everything, right? And it was just explosion onto the internet, which obviously comes with a lot of trash. It comes with a lot of trash, but at the same time, we were able to get some pretty cool stuff. And now all of those pretty cool things that have cultivated those viewing demographics that include us aren't able to get the new blood from this new primary season. So right. It's implicitly skewing the whole national discourse that kind of assumes, well, yeah, we're used to mainstream media kind of towing a certain line, always having these same basic talking points every time there's a coup that is, right wing or that these kinds of things. So, yeah, that's something that we've been talking about a lot here, but we're also talking a lot about deplatforming itself. The analogy is not just that I got cut off from a service. The right analogy here is that I just got fucking booted from my house and I didn't get to take my stuff with me.
Yeah. And
my phone book with all of the numbers for all of the people who I can call on for help, my community that I've built up to this time, is also in there. Only 6 people have been that I know of have come over from YouTube to Twitch, right? And the other thing is it's obviously a different demographic. There's a little bit of overlap between left Twitch and left YouTube. There's a little overlap, but it is also kind of a different experience. And so what was working for my community before, it's some of those people, it just might not work for them anymore because this is a live thing. So,
right.
Yeah, but they did the same thing to everybody who was using Adobe in Venezuela just a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
Or Boise parking we were talking about this a lot yesterday, just towed my friend's car that was at the park at 4 p.m. because it was quote unquote dusk. And she was coming back from class, and they'd towed it before she got back. And she spent the next 3 days trying to track it down. And the towing company was saying, well, we don't know. Talk to the cops. And the cops were saying, we don't know. Talk to the towing company. And then finally it turns out, yep, they had it. And now they're charging her $300. And she owes another $100 because she was late on rent. And it's just like, what's... So Professor... I'm going to put my little student self into place. What connects all of these things?
Well, capitalism, certainly.
Capitalism, the free association of equal subjects under the law? How could that possibly lead to this?
Well, let's say more capitalism, the system in which most people have nothing to sell sufficient to make an income except for their ability to labor. And other people can just sort of live off of rent from their position within the system. And in order for that to work, and just in a routine way for that to work, there has to be a certain amount of dehumanization and willing to screw around the people at the bottom of that system, because otherwise, how can you rationalize the fact that you're sitting where you are and they're sitting where they are, right? So if they can't make rent, if their cars, if they can't get their if they can't get their car back, if you've just destroyed their livelihood on YouTube, that must be because they're screwing up, that it must be that if they were, if they had a good work ethic, they'd be able to get together the money and if they were just, well behaved on the CNN comment thread, then they would, then you wouldn't have to do this to them. So it's not on you, it's on them, right? If you have it's not, I've heard the phrase that, capitalism is social Darwinism applied to economics, which I think is a little backwards because it's a, material reality that causes the rationalization, not the other way around. But it certainly is something that it certainly helps if you're going to enforce this to have a little social Darwinism in your worldview, so you can justify everything that's happening.
Oh, absolutely. And and they do. They almost always end up going back to it, right? Well, and especially when it's used as a justification for, I'll use an example, because we called the parking service yesterday in Boise to use an example, just for an example, and so we finally get to the person who is quote unquote responsible for the impound compliance at the place, and and she's trying to just refer me to another agency. And it's like, we've been dealing with this all week, and it's been, juggling from agency to agency. So who's responsible? She's like, what? I was like, yeah, who's responsible? And she's like, nobody's responsible. It's the code. Straight up, she just says it. She's like, it's the code. Right. And then I was like, nobody's responsible. And she's all, well, your friend's responsible. She could have seen the sign. Which is the same thing with the TOS. It's like, well, you're responsible for knowing that you could have been fully terminated without warning or recourse from all of your stuff because it's in the TOS. But it's like, yeah, but no one reads TOS anymore. We just assume that we'll get a warning if it's going to be, you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's, I don't, I'm not really a fan, but I have always liked John Oliver's line about how you could put the entire text of Mein Kampf in the iTunes user agreement and people would click through.
And they'd probably agree with half of it,
But yeah, there's no, but that's exactly the point. It's not meant to, right? It's incredibly long. It's fine print. It's not, you're not, it's written in a mind-numbingly, technical way. the whole setup is designed to encourage you to just click through. So that's whatever, that's what everybody does. That's essentially what you're supposed to do. It's not, it's just there so you can have that little formalism of, oh, you agreed to this. Even though in a more meaningful way. I mean, nobody agreed to it, right? It's just a way of saying, I agree to whatever your lawyers have come up with, because I have to, because that's how it works. But yeah, and that's the, the beauty of, the system, that if you have some like all powerful, one party state, that's persecuting you, at least you can say, oh, okay, well, it's him, right?
That
he's
asshole.
The guy, right?
Yeah.
It's that asshole who's doing it, because you can sort of like extrapolate backwards, and like that's there's somewhere that the buck eventually stops. But if it's if it's a system that's built on a certain set of incentives, then that it's all diffuse, and it's not really the ultimate responsibility of any one actor, and that's not even just an excuse. In a way, it really isn't the responsibility of any of them. But at the end of the day, it's very good for some people and very bad for other people.
Right. Well, the good and bad, who it's good and bad for, especially when it comes to representation under the law or the penalties, the fines, the prosecution. When it comes down to these things, we were talking about this yesterday, price and cost, not the same thing. If we both get charged a $70 parking ticket, what does that cost you in time, to actually pay? And for one person, that's like, 20 minutes. Another person, that's going to be all day. Right. And which means an extra day that they have to work because they're already just getting by. So they're going to have to pick up somebody else's weekend, which means that's time less spent, less recouped for energy to come back to work, So, but that, and this gets to basic, the basic Marxian dig at fetishization, how we fixate on price, we fixate on money. We're not talking about value, though. We're not talking about labor power. And that, that's my forced segue to ask you, I'm just curious, like, for people getting into the left or socialist things in general, what do you think is like the good kind of, you're a professor, like what's the 101 that you would tell someone to do? You're not going to tell people, well, you have to go read Capital to understand what you're fighting, right?
Right. Ooh, yeah, no, that's a good question. What's a good 101? From my perspective, I mean a book that I read a little while ago that I thought was pretty good is Bhaskar Sinkara's the Socialist Manifesto. It's certainly written for that purpose and at that at that level, and it's very, what I like about that book is that in addition to explaining a lot of things that, like, well, actually, so here let's say that book and Understanding Marxism by Richard Wolff. What I like, so the Wolff book is definitely like 101, and very deliberately so, because it's sort of, he said he wrote it because there are like a bunch of questions that he's asked a lot that he wants to be able to just say, here's the book, right, here's the answer to those questions. And so it's like real basic, like, here's how feudalism works with lords and serfs, here's how capitalism works with employers and employees, here's the way that the two are parallel, stuff like that. And then the Bhaskar Sankara book, Socialist Manifesto, is like, entry level intermediate, maybe, right? It's like it's not quite as basic as the Wolf book, but 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 if you're a
I could go one step. I could go one step more basic for the person who hates reading.
yeah.
The ABCs of Socialism by Verso Press and a bunch of the authors over at Jacobin. They basically got so many questions during the 2016 run about socialism because of Bernie that they put together this like chapter by chapter. Each chapter is one of the most frequently asked questions. Like the title of each chapter is a question that you're almost guaranteed to get asked. And then they give you like a great answer. But they're pretty short. It's illustrated. It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff in there. I mean, I've been like I've been trying, actually the stuff I've been writing for Jacobin the last couple months, I've been kind of trying to do like a little bit of that, right? Like I've been sort of trying to do a lot of things that are like, here's this, here's some industry that's like been in the news lately that sucks. Here's potentially what we could do about it, right? Here's PG&E, was in the news for indiscriminately shutting off a bunch of people's power in California. Here's why PG&E sucks, and here's what it might look like if we nationalized all those companies and tried to just provided had like a essentially like a single payer energy system where it was just paid for through taxation and and everybody got like a certain energy allowance, or like here's we've been like here's like all this media consolidation's been going on, and here's that's been in the news. Here's what like a post-capitalist media might look like, and maybe like we want to keep like some of the like some we could maybe put some of it under public ownership. Maybe we want to have like some of it as like decentralized workers co-ops, so it's not all in the same basket, so you get a variety of views, but like here's what that could actually look like, which is just an attempt to make it seem like something that could actually happen, right?
Right.
There's that. I mean, I'm sure there's that. Was it Frederick Jameson line about how we're in an era where it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism? It's sort of an attempt to kind of make non-capitalist arrangements concrete in a way that like in such a way that like it doesn't just sort of sound like it doesn't just sound like you're talking about some secular version of the kingdom of God or something, right? Like that socialism is this like distant state where we get everything we want and everything's perfect, that you're talking, that instead you're actually describing something that readers can imagine actually happening, and you say, oh yeah, no, I mean I'm sure there would still be problems or whatever, but I can see how that would be better.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. And it's we talk about the in sales, there's the door in the foot approach and the door in the face approach, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the metaphor, but the foot in the door, right? You start with something small, so it's asking your friend on the weekend, hey, can you help me move a couch? But really, like, your friend ends up staying longer and helps you move the whole house. But if it's going to be hard to get your friend to do that, then you say, yo, can you help me move my whole house? And then, oh no, couldn't do that. Oh, what about just my couch? So, but like the same kind of thing applies to rhetoric when it comes to, how are we getting people to think about alternatives to capitalism? If it sounds like such a tall order, it like, I don't know, the meme, fully automated gays, luxury state,
Right. No, totally. Like,
which is what I want, but
sure. Yeah. That sounds nice to me. I think there's some value in that. Like, I mean, that's the Aaron Bastani book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism. I think there's some I think there's some value in trying to think through how the more distant possibilities, might work, or, what the sort of like, you'd really hope like an advanced socialist society might evolve into. But I also think there's a lot of value, and I don't think the left does enough of this just imagining the very imperfect, like, okay, here's what we could have like 5 minutes after capitalism, because I think I think most people have a entirely justified fear of like wild leaps into the unknown. That like, as much as it might suck, like that you're like to have to deal, be on the phone with these companies for 2 days, to the towing company and the cops to figure out where your car is, or to pick up extra shifts to the restaurant, all that stuff. As much as these things might suck, they suck in a very familiar way, and in a way that it's easy to sort of think of as if it's almost just part of nature, that it's just, that's just the way things are. And then,
that's true.
Then you start talking about like, we're going to like radically undo everything. And, well, for one thing, I think we have a lot of kind of fables that tell us that that's a bad idea, right? That like, that's sort of the whole sort of Animal Farm thing, that's like a really well established narrative that we have, that,
right.
that it's like, oh, they tried to have a perfect society, and look at, it ended up even worse, or whatever. Right. And so that's something, so because we have to push back against that, and because like, even in the, even in the best of time, like even without that, like I think that there's probably just a sort of, reasonable human reaction that like, say, oh, everything's going to be totally different, it'll be better, to be suspicious about the better until you have a better idea of how, how it's going to be different, right? So if you can just kind of like, and I think the more you can say, hey, like, here's how things could be different, and not to sort of say like, not to. Well, actually, one of those articles in that Jacobin collection you mentioned, the ABCs of Socialism, is, I believe, I don't remember what it's called in there. I think they gave it a different title, but I think it was originally called The Red and the Black by Seth Ackerman. And in there, he has a really good line about how, you want to sort of try to have this imaginable thing that we could strive for, not because you're saying that's like the outer limit of what could possibly be achieved, right? That's like that. This is like the final form of social organization or anything, but just the opposite, to try to like kind of open up people's imaginations a little bit and say like, we don't have to have what we've got right now. We could mess with it. Here's a way that we could mess with it right now, and then like, maybe we could mess with it more going forward. But like at the very least. At the very least, we could accomplish this, like that Socialist Manifesto I mentioned. In the first, one of the things I like, the first chapter is called "The Day in the Life of a Socialist Citizen," and it's about, he lays out this kind of scenario for how socialism could come about in the U.S., and some of it's kind of tongue in cheek. Like he talks about there's a very thinly disguised version of a Bernie Sanders presidency, except it's the Bruce Springsteen, as president in this, and there's but in the course of that, then he sort of goes through how this leads to these political confrontations that eventually lead to expropriation of capitalists. And even when he's describing the sort of new system, he still describes like some of the characters are like members of more radical groups, and they want to go even further in the direction of completely getting rid of markets and stuff like that, which I like, because it's it's realistic. It's like, yeah, no, that is how, it's not that's how political change actually works. It's not like we all get on board with one thing and then it happens, right? We have we have complicated movements where different people have different ideas about how far to go or what the end goal is, and maybe and we can achieve certain things, and then we can argue about what else to achieve, and it's all very messy. But meanwhile, you can't. Meanwhile, we could have we don't have some people on the phone for 3 days to get their cars back, and and other people living in mansions, or owning information companies with a ridiculous amount of power over whatever else everybody else could see and watch and read.
Yeah, I fight for a future where nobody's car is going to get disappeared. You know what I mean? I fight for a future where nobody's going to get disappeared. I fight for, I like to clarify like rants with statements like that, because I think that it dismantles some of the, the deeply instilled concerns established by that Cold War propaganda media machine that currently is taking over YouTube.
Right.
Yeah. And speaking of alternatives to capitalism, that's kind of where Destiny gets stuck with everybody, right? And so I thought I'd start eating a pizza while talking to a professor, while talking about Destiny, so I could meme on Destiny, because he was eating pizza while talking to Michael Albert recently, and everyone thought that was hilarious. So, but now that I'm explaining it, it ruins the joke. Okay, but Destiny, how did that go? Well, I mean, everyone's seen it, I hope. If you haven't seen it, go check that out. But it's been a little while since then, right? You've been reflecting. Have you thought much about what you would say if you had a second stab at it?
Well, I did have a second stab at it. I had so there was the initial thing, and then there was God, let's see. It's all blurry together in my head, but it's like earlier this fall. The initial thing was over the summer, and then earlier this fall on the Surfs hosted a second conversation because he'd been we'd gotten into it on Twitter about rent control, and he wanted to argue about that, or I think there was actually. Because for the most part, since it happened, every once in a while, he'd refer back to it on Twitter in ways that I thought kind of distorted what had happened in that conversation. And, I would sort of correct it, and then he'd kind of ignore that. But then I think there was some night that he was drunk at TwitchCon or something, and he I'd said something about rent control. He was like, "Hey, you want to get on right now and let's do this?" And it didn't happen. It didn't happen that night, but it happened a little bit. You
weren't there, right? At TwitchCon?
No.
Okay.
He was there.
Sloppy Destiny.
So, but then a little while later, we did the second conversation, and so if you check that out, it's probably a good contrast, because if
that was the one on rent control, then I have seen it.
Okay.
It's just, the issue is that everyone chops up and then edits and then reposts, and so I've been in a few of them, but I didn't know that this was multiple conversations. And I just listen, so I'm just listening, going places, and I just somehow missed that.
Yeah. So the first one was mostly about the environment, and then the second one was mostly about rent control and related issues, universal programs. And you can probably, the best way to tell whether you're watching a clip from the first one or the second one is that the first one was super chill and friendly, and it was all oh, hey, well, here's a point you might not have thought about. What about blah 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 blah? It's okay, no, that's interesting. And then the second one was yeah, but what about this? No, that's not what I said. What about that? Right?
Do you think that it's because everyone telling him that he lost to you got under his skin over the course of a couple of months?
I don't know. I don't know what happened there, but
because that's my guess. Because if you go look, everybody loves to meme in the comment section saying that Destiny gets owned, and it's always a joke. But there's just so many people saying, "Well, this is unironically you goofed on this one, Destiny," and so I don't know. But then again, that's been happening a lot lately. So maybe we should lay off the poor guy and move on to.
Fair enough.
Let's talk about your book for a brief second. I know that that's doing well, according as well as a philosophy book goes.
Yeah. It sold 5,000 copies the first few months, which is not exactly what in the context of Stephen King or The Purpose-Driven Life or whatever you'd call a bestseller, but I think it's I think relative to being a combination of a logic textbook and a socialist tract put out by a small critical theory press, that's pretty good. They said in the email from John Hunt Publishing, which is Zero's parent company, they said they had this like super carefully worded sentence I thought was hilarious. They were like, 5,000 copies is in most contexts, by most definitions, where you start to call a book a bestseller. It's like, okay, that's interesting. But anyway, I'll take it. But that does strike me as very carefully couched. But yeah, no. Sold a bunch. People seem to be digging it. Happy about that. And got a couple of other things in the hopper. The big news actually from just today is there's a book that there's a book I'm co-writing with Matt McManus and Conrad Hamilton and Marion Trejo. We've all got we've all got essays in it called Myth and Mayhem, a leftist response to Jordan Peterson. And that's going to be coming out probably next fall. And the big news, which could finally announce today, is we got a Slavoj Žižek to write an introduction to that.
Wait, to which one?
Myth and Mayhem is what it's going to be called. It's called Myth and Mayhem, a leftist response to Jordan Peterson.
Oh, is this the essays from JPCon?
It's not from that, although there's probably going to be some over the one that I did. It's a book of it's a book that's going to be composed of like 2 long essays by Matthew McManus and Conrad Hamilton, and then some shorter ones by Marion Trejo, who's a Mexican feminist writer, and me. And so it's just haven't done a lot of publicity for it or anything yet. It's going to be quite some time before it comes out, but the Žižek introduction, like, we weren't sure for a long time whether it was going to happen. He turned it in yesterday, so
that's cool.
That's say cool.
That's really neat. Yeah, that'll take off, I'm sure then. Yeah, last time I saw him, he was not doing well, but apparently I think he's bounced back.
That's good.
Because I saw him May 2018 at the conference in Athens, Georgia, and he was kind of like, he was just talking about death. He was talking about death and his enemies, and he was trying to set some things right and get the record straight on a few things, because he was pretty sure he was going to die at that point. And he had like 5 different. He was very open about all of this stuff. He had like one organ failed, and then another failed, and like this one had a tumor, and that one had a this, and that just a chain reaction and everything shutting down. But technology these days, right? Like,
yeah.
So that's just what we need to tell people whenever they bring up Bernie's age, is technology these days. Have you heard about it?
Yeah, well, it also helps that the current president is about the same age, and I'd like to see what would happen if there was a fire or something and Trump had to run from one side of the room to the other side of the room.
Yeah, I want to. That's what I think everyone was saying, that's basically what would happen if it came to you know, on the stage, if Trump tried to bring up the age thing, is Bernie would just challenge him to some baseball or basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Bernie actually plays ball and like works out.
Yeah.
Runs through airports famously, you know.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I'm gonna play this this sound bit over the Streamlabs, so you won't hear it unless you turn up your volume for a second. But here it goes.
I don't know why you would take the copy, baby, when you can have the original.
Did you hear that?
No, I was going to find the link to reopen that, but
that's cool. But it's Nina Turner saying, "I don't know why you'd take the copy, baby, when you can have the original." And the reason I kind of want to touch back on this point is because the day that I got terminated from YouTube, I was all amped up on fire for Bernie because, you know, I just got finished with a big move. I'd kind of forgotten that the rally in Queens was even happening. I'd had too many frustrating conversations with people who were kind of just reasserting all these old talking points about, oh, Bernie, irrelevant now. Oh, the heart attack happened. Move on. And these are all the same people. I remember exactly what they were saying 4 years ago. And so it's like, same shit. You don't have anything new. It's the same bullshit script. And the intro, you know, so it was Michael Moore, a couple other people, but Nina Turner and AOC were like the big ones. And she goes on this rant about copies and originals, talking about how, you know, like he's proven himself at this point. And the big thing was hashtag Bernie's back. We all need to be using this hashtag, and we need to get the word out because the media's basically said, we've buried him. We're done with him. It's over. And she was like, you know, she's saying that, you know, she's quoting rappers and stuff. She's saying like, it's not, she's like, don't say it's a comeback. I've been here the whole time.
I don't know why you would take the copy, baby, when you can have the original.
You know, and so, yeah, it was really Bernie passion. I was feeling the burn, and that's why I was pacing when I got deleted. And a couple of people, well, whenever something happens to you and you're in public and you talk about it, other people start reaching out, being like, hey, this happened to me too. One of those people is $27. $27 has a small channel. It's small now because he had one with hundreds of thousands of views. He was getting 15,000 views per day up until when YouTube started cracking down about like 3.5 or 4 months ago, including like videos that had been around for years that all of a sudden they were cracking down on, saying that, oh no, not enough of this is your own original content, when really like he was a remixer. He was making promo videos for progressive talking points, and specifically a lot of them were Bernie promos. And in fact, you know, some of the stuff that we saw in the meme warfare last time around, that was $27, you know, sitting in Scotland, learning how to edit videos. And we're getting buried. That's basically what I'm saying. We're getting buried. There's a lot of mainstream talking points that are kind of trying to manufacture opinion against what is the most anti-establishment, progressive, grassroots candidate, you know, organizer-in-chief. And I know that you stand Bernie, but I'm curious, you know, you're the logical person. Your book, give them an argument. Sure. I'm curious if you've had any arguments with Warren or Pete or other kinds of supporters, and how is the logical method working for you on people who seem stuck in these scripts?
Yeah, so I did a it's, you can watch on Blogging Heads. I did like a 2-hour thing with this guy Noah Smith, who's a opinion writer for Bloomberg about Sanders versus Warren. And you know, it's I mean, as far as people who are stuck in the scripts, you're not gonna, I mean, this is not like I kind of feel like I wish I had better this, right? This isn't going to be like super inspiring, but
fuck, god damn it.
But like just being able to have a good argument by itself is rarely going to be enough. I think it's important to have, but I think the reason that it's important to have is because if and when they're kind of ready, you know, to move, it'll help them move. But But, if somebody is, a lot of people for various reasons, are, for example, might be like very emotionally attached to their commitment to like the Warren candidacy for reasons ranging from ones as relatively legitimate as wanting a female president to as kind of contemptible as that. Frankly, I think a lot of the media class and a lot of academics like Warren because they see themselves in her, and it doesn't seem to occur to them that most people don't like people like them. So she'd be, I think, a uniquely bad candidate for that reason. I know that sounds a little harsh, but that's just an honest assessment. I think that I don't really see, like, if you look at the places that Clinton lost last time, maybe she is the nominee, and if so, I hope I'm wrong. Like, I don't think that kind of she has a plan. Wankery, is going to go very far in those places.
People will say, well, those are just the racists over there anyway. Those are just the sexists over there anyway.
Which is funny too, because if you I think that for about a month after the 2016 election, there's this big media narrative about the WWC, the white working class. They talked about this all the time until about late November, early December 2016, where they switched to Russia all the time and while they were talking about that, though, it drove me nuts because I grew up in mid-Michigan. This is exactly the sort of place that they're talking about, and to the extent that phrase, the WWC, is being used as a stand-in for like people who are victims of deindustrialization and are maybe burned out on politics because they correctly see the Democratic Party as having screwed them over in the 90s. That's a group that's actually disproportionately not white. Right. Like, and this should be obvious because, like, if you think that it was, if you think that it was only white people who were working in like auto factories, for example, then a lot of the history of the 20th century must be very mysterious to you, right? Like the Great Migration, all that stuff, that it's not like these places like Detroit and Flint or Milwaukee, where Clinton really bombed in 2016, are disproportionately black in many cases. And if not a single white Trump voter had changed their mind, right? If every single like white person in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania who voted for Trump had done so, right? And you just had voters of color who by and large didn't vote for Trump. Some of them did, but mostly they just stayed home.
That's
right.
That's exactly where I was going to go, is that it's not about the people who showed up. It's about the people who didn't take work off to go show up, because taking work off to go show up requires a lot of energy. And if you don't have a lot of energy to give, if someone isn't inspiring you deeply, you're not going to be able to fucking pull that off. Straight up.
Exactly.
Straight up.
Exactly.
Because like the fucking biting your fucking gritting your teeth and actually doing the fucking paperwork and it takes passion.
Yeah, totally. And if every non-white person who voted for Obama in 2012, who stayed home in 2016, had voted for Clinton in 2016, she'd be president now. Like, you wouldn't have had to change a single white vote.
Wow. Yeah, but here we are. Same thing happening. But like you said, the people who are really emotionally invested already to certain candidates or certain ideas, it is what it is. But this is more about, and this is what the Bernie strategy campaign video that just came out a couple months ago says, is we're not looking at people who are already set. We're looking at independents, and actually independent voters are the majority in this country. That's wrong. It's not independent voters, but people who are not affiliated with the Democrats or the Republicans are themselves the majority, right?
Yeah, well, that's true, right? And yeah, look, I think that it's good to have the compare and contrast, to the other candidates. It's good to have the arguments lined up because one, that helps people, that helps Bernie people get excited. Two, it gives people who like the idea of Bernie but might be hesitant because of the mainstream media talking points they've heard, a way to get past that. But yeah, you don't want to, absolutely, you don't want to spend too much time on the people who are already married to, Warren or worse. You want to focus, on the people who haven't made up their mind yet, or who might not even have decided to register to vote in the primaries yet. That's what you want to do. And if you have enough excitement from that, it'll start to bleed over to those other categories. But you don't, like, it's just an inefficient use of your time to focus on arguing with the hardcore Warren voter or the hardcore, any of those other ghouls, Biden or Mayor Pete or, whoever, right? That's the people, if we get this done, it's not going to be primarily because we swayed those people. It's because we got a bunch of other people excited about it.
Yes. By the way, it's time for the mid-pivot switch to reintroduce ourselves because this is live TV. That's right, everybody. I'm Theory, or Theory Pleeb, or Dave, they, them. Thank you very much. I come over from YouTube where I got, terminated, which is to say excommunicated, which is to say they took my shit and kicked me out, and now I don't even have my contacts. Yeah. And they're holding it, hostage almost. I mean, it kind of feels like that, except that they won't even talk. They won't even respond. They won't respond to people's emails. There's hundreds of retweets on Twitter that say #FreeThePleeb. And thank you everybody for all of that support. Thank you everybody in the chat who's been keeping this thing going. #CopyGang. We are being graced by the presence of Ben Burgis, Professor Ben Burgis, the author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. The one thing I wanted to say before I hop into these last few questions before we close this thing out, and by the way, audience, you are able to ask questions, by the way, if you want to get any in there before we close out. I do have eyes on chat. Cell has been with us for a little while now, and I wanted to raise attention to the fact that Cell is present because Cell is an awesome contributor and just followed me. So whenever you follow me, Bernie Sanders' voice says in the background, free the plebe! And then whenever he says that, it shows him dancing, doing dank memes. And that's just because we're really fun over here. And my copy gang has taught me how to make anybody say anything I want with deepfake technology, basically. It's kind of like we had to do it ourselves. But the one thing I really wanted to drive home is that, yeah, if you want to help Ben Burgis, you should probably buy the book. If you want to help me, the easiest thing you can do to help me that requires no money is just to go retweet #FreeThePleeb on Twitter, and I'm giving away a prize at the end of the month for people who do that, for the person who does that the most. And if you want to get something in the mail, you'll get something in the mail. If you don't want to give me your address, then I'll make you something online. It'll be a badge that gives you access to stuff on the website or something like that. It'll be really cool, I promise. But the other thing is that Cell has a really cool website. And so I wanted to make sure that because people have a hard time, self-promoting because it's frowned down upon. But the fact is Cell, I'm calling you out. Do it. Self-promote. You've got one of the best channels on YouTube, even though it's just robot voices reading essays and texts. In my opinion, that's one of the most important things. And you were actually, back when we were talking about the primer, how to get into leftism kind of books and stuff like that, Cell was in there being like, what was the two things you said? I know one was wage, labor, and capital, which is a fantastic one. Fantastic one. The other one that I like is estranged labor. I say estranged labor, wage, labor, and capital, Bourdieu's Forms of Capital. Read Michael Downes's The Dangerous Maybe blog, The American Translation to Forms of Capital, if you want the real fucking easy peasy scoop on that one. Or check out the stream that we did on the topic on Sunday. That's up in my VODs. You can always look at it there. But yeah, just make sure to link that stuff, Sel. You rule. Oh, the other one was Engels's Utopian, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, which is actually kind of something that Ben was touching on. The idea that we don't want to be sounding so outlandish. People think that this is just like a kingdom of heaven on earth that we're fighting for. Like, yeah, of course, that's what my heart fights for. But in reality, like, humans are going to be shitty. I can't imagine non-shitty humans being on this planet in like 100 years unless there's like, well, no. We will never have like that beautiful, like, let's all hold hands moment. But there are concrete things that we can actively be working towards at all times.
By the way, I see asking...
Wait, you broke out, what?
Oh, sorry. So I was just seeing in the chat, The Road to Equality asked, what do you see as obstacles with Michael Albert's Paracon? And I will say that if you want to do a deep dive on that, a book that I was just reading is very good. It's called Alternatives to Capitalism. It's by Robin Hanhel and Eric Olin Wright. And Hanhel is a Paracon guy. If you don't know what that, for people who don't know what that means, that's participatory economics, which is what this person in the chat was asking about. And Eric Olin Wright is kind of more, socialisty, but it's a really good book because it's them exchanging essays back and forth. So they really dig into a lot of the sort of nitty gritty of how something like participatory economics could work. So if you want to, for people who want to think more about that, I'd recommend that book. I think I got it from Verso, but it's good.
Cool. Someone please link that in the chat if you can get it, if you can pull it up. Paracon seems really interesting, and I saw Michael Albert talk to Destiny.
And
sure, yeah. He did a really damn good job, because the fact is Destiny doesn't know how to talk to socialists except to pull the burden of proof is on you to tell me all about the alternatives. And it's like, well, he spent his life working on arguments as to what the alternatives are, so he's best equipped for that. Not to say that his is the best alternatives, but he was best equipped for that conversation, it seemed like. And except for you were better because you're with me right now. So whoever's with me right now will get that. So
no, Michael Albert is definitely best at, because that's the last person you can really pull that off.
Yeah,
like he, I mean, like, there are different approaches to this. Like Marx says in one of the introductions to the first volume of Capital, that he's not really interested in writing like recipes for the cook shops of the future. Michael Albert has like a fat cookbook of
Master Chef
for the cook shops of the future.
Exactly.
He has spent a ridiculous amount of time working out the finer details of how he thinks this could work. And whatever you think about, that sort of difference in approach, or whether you totally buy into his approach or not, the idea that somebody would come at him with that kind of like, okay, but like, how would it work, right? Like how, like, what would we do if we didn't have stores? Like with Michael Albert, is just kind of hilarious and awesome. But
well, that's what a lot of people come into more left or anti-capitalist ideas, at least through like those zeitgeist conspiracy theory movies. At least the first one was more. I mean, I can't really judge them. It was so long ago when I saw them, but I do know that's where people get introduced to the Venus Project the most, which is, it seems very, very, much like utopian socialism, but because this one guy, Jacques Fresco, self-trained, didn't really go to school, kind of inventor, engineer. He's been engineering futures that would be resource-based economies instead of, other forms of scarcity-based economies. And so, it's neat, though. Some people get off on saying like, well, this is the answer. Other people, it's just like, it blows their minds open because it's something new. And at the end of the day, like, my whole thing is we just need more people doing this. We just need to, it should be a class. It should be a class everyone takes. A class in, like, how do we think about the future? Because, so Peter Frase's book, right, For Futures, it's like, look, there's a very simple way of mapping the future. There will either be economic and social political equality, or there won't be. There will be automation continuing to rise, or we'll probably have Armageddon, right?
Right.
And then there will be ecological abundance, or there won't be. And if you take, rising automation as your steady variable in all four of those futures, then the four futures, the axis is going to be one of ecological abundance versus scarcity, economic inequality versus equality, right? And so when you do that, then you have a future. I can hear myself. You have a future where there's a lot to go around and it's shared equally. There's not a lot to go around, still shared relatively equally. Then you have one where there's enough to go around, but a handful of people own all that shit, right? A handful of people own all of that. And that's basically where we are right now, moving into neo-feudalism. Fewer and fewer people owning more and more and more of the collectivized wealth that we've accrued up to this point, meaning the means of production, basically. And then the last future is one where more and more people are being rendered irrelevant, superfluous, extra, surplus by the rising automation, which means that class antagonisms within the working class, the distinctions between skilled and unskilled, gets to be meaner and meaner, the rhetoric around that, until we have people being like, who are these leeches? Well, these are leeches who were providing socially necessary labor up until now. And then, that's when everyone gets left behind and has to fight robots because the rich people took off and left us on this trash dump, and that's Wall-E, right? So that's a way of mapping the future. We need more ways of talking about these things, and we need more ways of talking about, well, what are ways that we can have participatory representation and action where we get to say, what do we want our society to look like at the level where we live engaging it, But one of these things that Michael Albert doesn't seem to do, maybe he just doesn't do it in the debate very well. I haven't read his books yet. This also seems to be an issue with Richard Wolff. I think I saw you post about how you wrote on this, but I haven't been able to track it down and I didn't have time, blah, blah, blah. It's just this question about co-ops. It's something that we've touched on before on this stream. Yeah. And that's just that co-ops, worker owned. It's really good for that one kind of alienation where you don't have any say over your work week. You don't have any say over anything. You don't have any ownership over the things that you're producing. But what about, intra what about that issue between co-ops within a country and then between countries? And is this something you've touched on a lot, or? And actually, yeah. I feel like my question made sense to you because you know where I'm coming from, but it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to somebody who's just hearing it for the first time. So could you recapitulate the question? Yeah.
So tell me if this is what you're asking. Is the idea that that if we have, if you imagine the kind of, we were talking earlier about realistic visions of socialism, sort of describing post-capitalist arrangements that sound like they could actually happen. And to the extent that a significant sector of the economy in one of those visions is maybe private competing workers' co-ops, then that solves some of the problems with capitalism, that you no longer have a unelected boss who's telling you what to do, at least if you're in one of these companies. And you have, and certainly at least within the firm, you're going to have a vastly more egalitarian wage spread, which is, certainly what the evidence seems to show about co-ops, that, it's very hard to convince your fellow, generally speaking, if everybody gets to vote on the wage scales, they're much more egalitarian than what you get in capitalist businesses. I argued in one of my debates with Destiny that co-ops are much better for the environment, etc. So they have some advantages, but I think what you're pointing to is that a private sector that was dominated by co-ops would still have certainly at least some of the same problems as a regular capitalist private sector.
Right, because I will state my problem is socially necessary labor time itself being dictated by what's possible vis-a-vis the technology as it exists currently. And the fact that if we don't work within our co-op where we work in this hypothetical, if we don't work and produce a certain amount fast enough within a certain time frame, then we're going to get outcompete by someone else who's willing to do it, for, longer hours for less pay. And so we're essentially going to be in this position where now we have extra meetings we have to sit in on a weekly basis just so we feel like we're responsible for the exploitation we're putting ourselves through.
Sure. So trust me, I've spent enough of my life and hours of my life that I'm never going to get back in faculty meetings to feel the force of this last objection.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, no, I think a lot of this, is right. So I think that that now I will say that if you look at really existing co-ops, they do seem to have a lot less pull towards even right now, even ones that exist right now, like Mondragon, that are competing with regular capitalist companies. They do seem to feel a lot less pull towards relentless expansion, than their hierarchical, counterparts. They seem to grow, much more slowly because, as you would imagine, if the workers themselves are making the decisions, they're less willing to make trade-offs between their immediate quality of life and the growth of the company, right?
Yeah.
Now, but are there going to be some, that they're, nonetheless, even in a private sector co-ops, you still got competition. You're still going to get some pressures in bad directions that come from competition. You're going to, and you're going to have a series of things that are going to go with that, right? So, I think that we can talk about it case by case, and I think some of the bad incentives that exist for regular hierarchical corporations aren't going to exist for co-ops. Some of them are. So I think that this kind of gets back to the point about utopias that you have. That I think that right now the existence of a distinct class of external owners of businesses is a massive threat to, not to be all melodramatic about it, but life on Earth and continuing of human civilization, right? That's
it's the Wally point I made. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So if we want to eliminate that, and we're trying to figure out how to eliminate that, we can, you can consult, you can consult Michael Albert or Robin Hanhel, Paracon, and maybe that is something we could have eventually. Although even Hanhel, who's Albert's frequent collaborator on this, does acknowledge that that's so many moves away from what you've got. You'd almost certainly have to start with something more market socialisty on your way there. But I'd say that if we're just sort of trying to come up with ways out of the bind we're in right now, right? We need to find ways to socialize existing things that we could convince lots of people to do right now. And so if that meant some combination of nationalizations and some combination of turning hierarchical businesses into private co-ops, then you'd still need a strong state to regulate that cooperative sector. You'd still,
what about
some of the bad incentives would still exist, and maybe in the long term you could phase it out entirely, right? So another book that's really interesting on this is the Leigh Phillips and Mike R. I forget how to pronounce the co-author's last name, The People's Republic of Walmart, where they talk about how to, the sort of history of the debate about economic planning and ways that capitalist companies do internally to sort of see how new technology allows us to plan better. And maybe we could eventually move to something entirely planned, just to be all, just to actually do a little Marxist theory for just a minute here, if that's okay. Then I would say, if you think about sort of go back to basics, right? Say, all right, you read all that good stuff by Marx that people were recommending. You're reading off the chat, right? What's his objection to capitalism on a sort of normative level. What he's saying, like, Marx clearly has some conception of freedom that flies the face of capitalism, and so what is that? And what I'd suggest is that what I get out of it, at least, is that like when you say, all right, what do you mean by socialism? I think for Marx, you could almost substitute the phrase social freedom, and because freedom is the normative concept he talks about the most, and then the question is freedom from what, right? And I think that Marx basically has two answers to that, which roughly get you the two phases of socialism he talks about in the Critique of the Gotha program. So one is freedom from capitalist exploitation, right? Freedom from like rule by the ruling class. So he talks, that's like at the end of the first chapter of the Critique of the Gotha program, when he's talking about how we shouldn't focus too much on distribution of income because that's just a symptom of who's in charge and setting income levels in the first place. Or like if you read his inaugural address to the First International, where he talks about he praises worker co-ops because he says that they show in sort of germ form that you can have modern industrial production without division between a class of masters and a class of hands. So that's one kind of freedom. And then the other kind of freedom is freedom to spend your time on projects of your own choosing, right? So, so
that's my focus. That's my focus. Yeah, that's been my focus.
Yeah. Well, fair enough, right? That sounds good. That roughly is what you need, like, fully automated luxury communism for,
right?
You can think of the first kind, maybe freedom from having to work for a boss, and the second kind is freedom from having to work, period, right? They have that, like, if you have, and you can see how one of them could turn into the other one, because if you start off with workers' control of the means of production, then as this gets down to back to the Peter Frey stuff about Four Futures, that as new technology allows us to automate away tasks that used to have to be done by human beings, instead of some people losing their jobs and having to survive off Yang bucks, and some people having to work as hard as ever, if the workers themselves are making these decisions, then they could very well collectively decide, no, it would be better if we could all just maintain our current standard of living, but we could just spread around the work more thinly. And there are actually pretty recent, even like social democratic precedents for this. If you look at like places like France and Germany, where you'll have like big strike waves demanding like shorter work weeks, right? So if you have workers control production, then if machines make some human labor unnecessary, well, if we all collectively machines, we could all just collectively decide, to work less and less for the same output. And the kind of end point of that, possibly, I think, to my mind, it's an open empirical question whether we get all the way there. But certainly, I think what Marx is talking about, if you read Critique of the Gotha program, or like the Fragment on Machines from the Gundrisse, is that you'd eventually get to a point where both technologically and culturally you'd come so far from capitalism that people weren't that a lot of the motivations were different, that people weren't thinking in such a dog eat dog way, so people would often like try to come up with solutions to technical problems, maybe just for like prestige or just to sort of as a creative outlet. So what little work still needed to be done, but done by humans, could be done by would just get done as a result of everybody pursuing the projects they were interested in, and there'd be enough technological abundance that there'd be more than enough for everybody to go around, right? That's the from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs, the Critique of the Gotha program, right? And I guess all I could really say about that, that like kind of fully automated luxury communism is, I'm
you're for it, yeah. Well, I'm not advocating for. That'd be great. I'd love it too, but that's not what I'm. My concern with Michael Alberts is that we would work ourselves to death in that future, because most people now are not attenuated to live as human beings. We're meant to live as wage workers. We are not trained to think about time spent outside of the domination of the economy, right? Like, and it's not, so an answer I want to know more about and look more into. So this is not a conversation for now, but is international trade sector unions that would be able to. So if automation was going to put you out, in this sector, if it was going to harm this sector, that entire sector has a seat at the table with the other sectors that are talking about putting it out of place, right? And then because it's an international trade union sector, the multinational corporations who can, if you won't fucking work with us, we'll go to this other country. No, you can't, is the point. And getting to that point was, that a lot of little socialist groups fell apart. How about we just say that? They fell apart over this distinction between international and national. And it seems like maybe we have the technology now that it would be a little bit easier to do. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think I think if this gets to some of what you're talking about, I think a short answer is that look, even if we had within each national, even if we had like a planned economy that would work much the way that like somebody like Michael Albert thinks it would, and I know he's an anarchist, so he wouldn't like that way of putting it, but whatever. Like let's just for the sake of simplicity, right? Let's just say that, right? Even if that were the case, I think you'd need some kind of global redistributive programs kind of on top of that, right? And certainly the more you have a sort of socialist mixed economy like we were talking about that you might have in that kind of 5 minutes after capitalism, the more internal redistribution that you need to have. But I think that's okay. We can do that. I think that it's gonna be a lot easier to do that though if we've expropriated the external owners of businesses because they have financial incentives against that are just wildly different from what even any co-equal worker owner of a successful cooperative is going to have. So that would be my pitch. You gotta go. I gotta go. I've been trying to stay a little longer because I feel bad about having shown up late, but thanks for this. This was fun, and good luck bothering YouTube and getting them to reverse this if that's still possible. Okay, I want to say thank you. Thank you everybody for coming. Thanks for all of the audience engagement. But before you leave, I need a trans rights and I need you to say free the plebe and just make a personal message and all of that to YouTube. Speak to YouTube for a second at your camera because I'll probably use this in a video. You know what I mean? Sure. Trans rights, free the plebe, YouTube. Not cool. You can't be doing stuff like this. We've had this conversation, and if this behavior is going to continue like this, we're going to have to talk about nationalization. Which is exactly what we're doing. All right, well, yeah. Professor Ben Burgis, thank you so much for joining us. All right. Thank you. Yeah, take care. Bye-bye. And to the one person in the stream who was asking, what is his official stated ideology? Look, well, you're still on. You can just answer it yourself. But was I going to be right? I was going to say, I've heard you say it. It's just socialism. Yes, socialism. I was right. Okay, cool. Outstanding. See ya. Take care. Solidarity. Later, comrade. Whoa, look at that. Now I'm in both. Now I'm in both the boxes. Well, we're gonna raid no comment chick, y'all. Get ready for the raid. Get ready for the raid. And in the next 2 minutes, I will be looking over the chat before we raid out. All right? All right? For those who've never joined before, for those who are new to Twitch, I need you to know that raiding is where we're going to go from here to someone else's audience. So we're going to move into someone else's chat.
That's right. And for those who've never joined before, I didn't finish my pitch before about how you can help me out without spending money. If you have Amazon Prime, give me a sub. Log in really quick and give me a sub. It's free to do once per month. It's free to do once per month, and it gives me money! Also, if you're rich, give me money. We all gotta work together. We all gotta work together and do what we can do. You learned how to make a lot of money. Me, I took out $60,000 in debt so that I could do what I'm doing right now. Everyday progressive show. Interview yourself. You are a funny person, Joe. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate all of you for being here. Seriously, this was a good time. Thank you. 17 viewers say they are ready to raid. No comment check now. Get your copy pastas ready, everybody. Get ready to say trans rights. Get ready to say hashtag free the plebe. Get ready to say copy pasta agitprop. Get ready to use your goose emojis. I'm gonna spam this right here. And you can use it too if you want to. For those who are in the Minecraft server, I'll be there soon. Solidarity forever.
Free the Pleeb.